One of Jeffrey Epstein's victims just came forward publicly for the first time ever, and her words have set off a firestorm on Capitol Hill. Jasmine Crockett didn't just listen, she exposed how a system built to protect power is still protecting it today.
Thank you so much. And first of all, let me just say that we are standing before you. We're having this conversation because of the oversight Democratic leadership. And so I want to reiterate that it's the Democratic leadership on oversight that has truly been able to move this forward. I'm sure many of you don't recall, but we were sent home early to try to avoid being able to take a vote on something like getting these files. We are about doing real transparency. We don't care who's in the files. We are going after you. So if I had to sum up what happened today, we heard the stories of victims, and honestly, we heard the story of at least one person that has never come forward before today. This was the very first time that she was telling anyone in a semi-public way her story. And if I had to summarize the theme, I would say that their theme was to do something. It is probably the theme of the American people in general right now when it comes to government, is that they want us to do something. So yes, we have the roundtable, but they actually want to see some action. The fact that this started off in the 90s, and we had someone who could talk about what happened to them in the 90s. But then you go down the line and you've got somebody that's telling us their story from 2008. These failures led to years and years of abuse that did not have to take place. And so the reality is this. Some think that this is all over and some think that nothing else is going on. But if there was ever a RICO case, it would have been the Epstein case. So how we went from something that should have been RICO because of how sophisticated of a system this was, and this wasn't just one little sick old man that was doing stuff, but there were so many layers, whether we're talking about the banks that were involved, whether we're talking about those that worked for him, that helped him, whether we're talking about the monster known as Maxwell, and that's exactly how y'all need to refer to her. She is a monster. She is not a victim. So let me tell you, I want some action items to come out of this because for once we somewhat look like we're bipartisan in the oversight committee. Number one, we need answers. We need answers on why it is that Maxwell was transferred from her current station or her former station in Florida down to Texas. We need to have an understanding because everything that I heard today leads me to know that for sure she was all up and in and through this entire process, not to mention that she was indicted by a jury of her peers and then she was tried and convicted and given 20 years. So why is it that we had somebody, again, it almost seems like we are doomed to repeat our failures, because why is it we have high-level people that seemingly are running cover for a criminal? And that is what she is. She is a monster and she is a criminal. So number one, we need answers on what happened with that transfer, why it took place. And honestly, we all need to stand together and say that Maxwell needs to go back to where the monsters go, which is to a higher level of security. We also need to understand that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has legislation that she has been trying to push forward. And so in a bipartisan way, we all need to get behind Debbie, because we found and what we learned is that there were loopholes as it relates to the Crime Victims Act. And so we've got to make sure that no other victims suffer in the way that they did when you have somebody like Alex Acosta that decides that he wants to play games and dismiss a case and never inform the victims of what's going on as is required by law. So we are going to have to fix those loopholes to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it took them 10 years of fighting this, and ultimately by the time they got to the end of it, well, it also was Jeffrey Epstein's end, and so there was not a resolution for that. And the final thing that I think that we need to do is, obviously, we need to continue to push forward and make sure that we get all the files, because we know that we have not received them all. Because I am standing in front of the press, I'm also going to make a plea. One of the things that I realized was that there's a lot of stuff that the DOJ may have, but honestly, if you don't have a thorough investigation, and I can't say if we had a thorough investigation or not, we have no idea. But the reality is that when you have investigators that go out and they collect information. I am not necessarily convinced that they even have gone out and done their due diligence to fully investigate this case in the first place. So if there's anyone in the public that believes that you have information that would be valuable, you've never been able to get through to federal agencies, or no one would listen to you when you try to go forward and bring information forward, I am asking that you trust Oversight Dems and you bring that information to us. Or if you know where some information is contained, let us know so that we can then send subpoenas out that way. We want to do right not only by those that have already suffered under Epstein, but we want to prevent other trafficking rings that we know are out there. We want to make sure that we are doing right for future generations. So with that, I now have the honor of presenting to you the firecracker out of New Mexico.
What happened in that hearing wasn't just another political statement. It was a reckoning. Representative Jasmine Crockett stood before cameras and reporters and reminded everyone what real oversight looks like. For years, the Epstein story has been told in fragments, names whispered, cases settled, files sealed. But in this hearing, something different happened. A survivor spoke publicly for the first time. Her voice, quiet but certain, broke through decades of silence that money and influence tried to maintain. Crockett used that moment to lay bare a larger truth. This wasn't just the story of one predator. It was the story of an entire system that failed. She called the Epstein apparition what it was, a network, a structure that should have been prosecuted under RICO laws for organized crime. Banks moved the money, employees handled logistics, powerful associates looked away. Each failure was a link in the same chain that let abuse continue from the 1990s all the way into the next generation. That's why her demand for action matters. Crockett wasn't satisfied with sympathy or empty hearings. She asked why Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted, tried, sentenced, was quietly transferred to a lower security facility. She asked why, even now, victims have to beg for information from the Department of Justice. She asked why oversight committees still don't have access to all the Epstein files, even though Congress is supposed to serve the public, not shield the powerful. And she didn't stop there. She called for bipartisan backing of Debbie Wasserman Schultz's legislation to close the loopholes in the Crime Victims Act, the same loopholes that let prosecutors like Alex Acosta cut deals behind victims' backs. That's not ancient history. It's an open wound in how justice is administered. Crockett made it clear, until those gaps are closed, the system that failed Epstein's victims could fail someone else tomorrow. What makes this moment different is that it recenters the survivors. The woman who spoke for the first time didn't just recount her trauma. She exposed how institutions repeatedly prioritized reputation and convenience over human lives. Crockett understood that. Her tone wasn't partisan, it was protective. She said plainly that oversight Democrats want transparency no matter who gets named in the files. That's an extraordinary statement in a political climate built on deflection and fear. There's also a deeper layer here about how justice works in America. When people hear Epstein, they think of a single man, but Crockett reminded the country that power operates in networks. If investigations stop at one individual, the rest of the machinery keeps running. That's why she framed it as a RICO case. She was talking about accountability for every institution, financial, legal, political, that sustained him. It's about building a model of justice that's proactive, not reactive, one that protects potential victims before another scandal surfaces. And maybe that's why her plea at the end was so important. She invited members of the public, anyone with credible information, to come forward, promising that oversight Democrats would actually listen. That was more than a soundbite. It was a signal that this investigation isn't closed and that justice doesn't end when the cameras turn off. What Crockett did in that moment was reframe the entire Epstein investigation as a moral test for the government itself. Can the same institutions that failed these women now hold themselves accountable? Can transparency finally outweigh the comfort of secrecy? Her call for action was a reminder that the measure of a democracy isn't how it treats the powerful, it's how it protects the powerless. If you take anything from this, it's that public pressure matters. Every time Congress hears from voters who demand answers, it becomes harder for anyone to bury the truth. So, if you believe in real accountability, stay engaged. Keep asking questions about those files, about those transfers, about those investigations that never seem to finish. Because justice only moves when people push it. This is what the Liberal Lens is here for, to keep that pressure alive, to keep these stories visible, and to remind everyone watching that power only changes when it's challenged. Subscribe, support independent journalism, and help keep the light on the places that power tries to keep dark.